Welcome back, everybody, to the Omni stage at Event Tech Live USA Canada 2021 and to our next session, Leverage the New Virtual Sale. And I'm delighted to welcome back to Event Tech Live USA Canada our good friend Eric Thompson. Eric is the VP at Sandler Training by PSTA. Eric, welcome back to Event Tech Live. It's great to see you again.
Hey, thanks for having me back this afternoon. Lots of great ideas have been shared so far around the changing technology and events, but ultimately, nothing can happen until something gets sold, right?
Absolutely right, Eric. I'm going to hand you over to kick off your session. I'll see you back here a little bit later on with some questions.
Appreciate it, James. Thanks. Appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. And really, given the events of the past year, many of my clients have had to really pivot their sales and their selling and the way they go to market to survive. And ultimately, technology has really played a huge role in that, especially in this new virtual sale. So over the next 25 minutes, I wanted to take some time and to dive into some of those. Hey, Steve, I lost my clicker for some reason. I wanted to dive into some of those areas and talk a little bit about the virtual sale, what's going on the buyer side, as well as traditional sales and how some of those things are affecting what we're dealing with. And then also talked about some tactics and strategies for virtual selling and combining both as we get back into that more hybrid model. So Sandler Training, not sure if many have heard of Sandler, but what's Sandler all about? Sandler's all about knowing to owning. Go ahead, Steve. And most people stop at knowing, and they get some knowledge. They start to read a book. Maybe they attend a class, take a course online. Hey, listen to a podcast, and they think they've figured it out. And that's where it stops. But that's really not how humans work. The next phase is taking that knowledge and working it into changing behaviors. And that's where we come in and help our clients take that knowledge, leverage it in their real world application and help them to develop the talk tracks and the question sets for their real world clients, their real world prospects. So let's get into what we're here for today. Go ahead, Steve. Research, Sandler Research Center did some research and put together some interesting stats. A couple of years ago, back in 2019, 2020, they put together a study, and I think it's relevant still today after COVID, but pre-COVID, 100% of all sales teams had goals. So all sales teams had goals, but only 13% of them hit them. I think that's kind of staggering. Only 13% of sales teams hit their goals, and I'm scared to see what it might be after COVID. You know, some businesses have flourished, others have struggled. So why do teams fall short? Then you take a look at the personal sales reps, and only 47% hit their sales targets. Why do reps fall short? Why don't they achieve their goal? Are they just order takers? Are they just waiting for orders to come in? Maybe it's a bad quota. Maybe it's poor lead times, poor service. Could be lots of excuses that get added in here, but I think there's some struggles along the way at play, maybe out of their control. So when it comes to sales, this is going to be a little bit more hopefully interactive. So hopefully you have a paper, or you can use the chat feature and put it in the chat. But where are you struggling with sales? Go ahead, Steve. Where are you struggling with sales? If you had to finish the sentence, I could be better at sales if I could only, maybe it's stop chasing buyers. Maybe it's stop wasting time. Write something down on your paper. What was it that ultimately you're struggling with when it comes to sales? Maybe it's dealing with stalls and objections. Maybe it's worrying about price or feeling like a pest to prospects or clients for that matter. What is it for you? And when you take a look at that and you take a look at what you wrote down, at Sandler, we talk a lot with our clients around behaviors, attitudes, and techniques. Behavior, it's about the goals, plans, and actions to make a change or to do something. The attitude, it's about what we're telling ourselves. And technique, it's about the way we go ahead and implement strategies and the question sets that we use. Take a look at your what you put down on sheet and ask yourself, is it a behavior problem, an attitude problem, or a technique problem? Now, if you do this exercise with your team, if you're a leader, most likely you're going to get a different answer for everyone on the team, even if it's the same struggle that they're dealing with. And I think that's what makes coaching so difficult. Everybody sees the issue differently at different points from the different points of view. So let's dive into the virtual sales environment, if you will. I want you to think about your sales process. I want you to think about how it is that you go about selling. Go ahead, Steve. What are the steps for your sales process? I want you to take a second and jot down, big picture, outline what are the steps of your sales process. You could say the marketing's been done. You could say the CRM has been updated with all the information. We're basically showing up either in person or on a virtual meeting. What are the steps that you're going to go through? Now, you could use the ones that I have on the screen. You could just put those in order. Or think about your steps. What makes you unique? So as we've worked with thousands of salespeople and done this thousands and thousands of times, we get a different order every time. So what I'm about to show you is kind of an average overview of what we've found as we talk to salespeople like yourself. So these are things that we typically hear from salespeople. Ultimately, it starts out with some sort of a needs analysis. We want to make sure that we have some sort of a solution, right? I mean, we're taught to ask lots of open-ended questions, to dive in and figure out what's wrong. One might call it pain. What are their pain points that need to get solved? Once we figure that out, now we're ready to go ahead and change and present some sort of a proposal or a solution. You're going to round up all that was needed. You're going to use your team and crunch the numbers. You're going to do some checks and make sure that you can get what it is that they need to solve their problems, and go ahead and give them that proposal. But when you think about it, we should be pretty happy that we're at the proposal stage, right? I mean, how many times or how many people do you have in that proposal stage right now? I mean, if you think about what I was taught years ago with sales, it's a numbers game. Sales is a numbers game. That's what my dad taught me, my grandpa taught me, and so on. I thought, hey, I was the proposal king. Lots of proposals on the street. But nothing was closing. Why? Because I think when we moved into that next step of close, I was met with lots and lots of objections. So I had to start to handle those objections. I had to start to handle those things that they were bringing up that maybe I wasn't prepared for, or that I didn't bring up ahead of time. So that last stage is really the follow-up. As we continue to get the information that they're asking for, we keep following up and following up. Now, as you look at that paper that you have down and the steps that you put down in front of you, it might not be exactly what I have on the screen. Maybe you've got some of those steps, but I'm curious, do you do it the same way every time? Do we do it the same way, the same approach when it comes to dealing with our prospects? Sandler Research did another survey, and they found that 73% of sales companies have a formal sales process. So that leaves a quarter of the companies that are out there doing the old quote and hope method, right? Maybe it's the wing it system. We'll just see what happens. So nearly 3/4 of companies have a sales process, but only 37% of those actually follow it. So the question really at hand is, do you see that as a problem? I see it as one. I mean, as I work with my clients, when I work with sales leaders, we notice that the leader is really struggling to help their team improve. Why? Because they don't know what everyone is doing. I mean, if we don't know what everyone's doing, How can we really capture best practices? And if we think about capturing those best practices and helping everyone improve as a team, we tend to struggle a bit with that. And as we think about our prospect and we think about how they adhere and deal and interact with us as salespeople, I think they've developed their system out of a necessity to deal with a salesperson. So what have we come to understand is that when a prospect is dealing with us, you can go ahead, Steve, we ultimately have evolved, the buyer has evolved their process out of interactions, out of dealing with other salespeople. So we know that these things that are happening on a sales call with a prospect, they're ultimately not sure why it's happening, but most of those roadblocks, most of those stalls, most of those objections that the buyers use, they've come from other salespeople, other interactions, not necessarily you, your company, or your products. So they put those barriers up to try to protect themselves, if you will. So let's take a look at the buying order, the steps in the buyer's process. And as you think about maybe your buying habits, these are some of the typical steps that we typically hear. And some of these steps may or may not be things that you use personally, your prospects and clients use. But take a second and think about what order those might go in. As we look at it, where does it really start? When we work with prospects and we start to engage them in that sales process, it ultimately starts with expressing some sort of interest. They express interest. Go ahead, Steve. But do they really tell us the whole truth? Probably not. They probably hold some things back. And what we've learned is it typically comes in one of two forms. First, they express interest, but they understate their interest. And it sounds a little bit like this. Let's just think of a personal side. Let's think if you were going to the furniture store with your spouse. You drive there, you get out, you walk in the door. It's probably a beautiful day out, and it's the last place you'd want to be. But you walk in, they show up next to you, and the first thing they hear is, they ask you is, hey, what brought you in here today? The first thing you respond is what? I'm just looking, right? So we understate our interest. Why is it that we don't tell them I'm looking for a blue plaid couch with 2 recliners on each end? I don't even know if it exists. But why is that? Because we don't necessarily have any comfort built with that salesperson. So I'm going to hold back my cards and just tell them I'm just looking. So they act motivated because they're there, but they're pushing you back as well. Now, the other way that they tend to express some interest and act motivated, and maybe you've heard some of these, this other side is, hey, they overstate their interest. Johnny said I should give you a call. You would help Johnny with his project, and it turned out great. I'm excited to hear how you're going to be able to help our company with some of the projects that we've got coming up. So basically, it's a referral. A friend of theirs told them to give you a call. Do you hear any of those in your world? I'm guessing that you close all of those, right? So they act motivated. Why? Because it leads them into their next step. They've also realized that salespeople, sometimes we don't necessarily feel the best about themselves, so they kind of got to get us rah-rahed up and make us feel good so that they can obtain that information. They know that it's our job as a salesperson to know everything we can, get to know products and our services, and go ahead and share that great information with them. I mean, we're programmed to go ahead and answer their questions when they ask them. And then we share all sorts of information on how great our products are, how great our services are. But ultimately, in the end, it leads to that avoiding of commitment, that mislead, that second mislead, if you will. It sounds like, wow, Eric, there's a lot of information here. I didn't really realize how much that was really involved in this project. Tell you what, let me have over the weekend, maybe later next week, I'll give you a call. Or Sometimes we hear, hey, Eric, this looks great. I took it to my boss. They loved the ideas that you brought to them, but they were thinking, hey, what if we expanded it out and you hosted all of our events next year, not just the one we talked about? I mean, if you did all of them, I mean, what could you do for us then? So you race around and you get all that information together, you send it over, and then they move into their last step. They hide. That horrible 4-letter word, they hide. And lately, it's become easier and easier for them to move into that hide step, that hide process. Voicemail, emails, they just keep ignoring you. But we've been taught as a salesperson to follow up, follow up, follow up. Unfortunately, some of us really struggle with that particular concept. So let's put this all together. If you're an interested buyer, you can go ahead, Steve. You're an interested buyer. You come into the sales process, you're an interested buyer, and it's a motivated salesperson. They enter the dance, so to speak, the buyer-seller dance. They express interest. Salesperson does a little qualifying. They act motivated. We find some ideas. We present a solution. We give them all the information. We think they love it, so we move in as a salesperson for a close, and they back off a little bit and avoid that commitment. We start to handle some of the stalls and objections they throw at us, and they go ahead and disappear an educated prospect. And we come out on the other end as a frustrated salesperson. So, do you struggle with that? Do you struggle getting stuck in that chase mode, in that hide mode, and not sure what to do? So, what can we do to help? You know, I've heard some people lately say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this new virtual sale. So they're going to just wait it out. They're hoping it's going to go back to normal. I don't know that it ever will. So we've got to be able to leverage how it is that we're going to go at the new virtual sale. Go ahead, Steve. Some research was done that about 77% of buyers say that they're not going to go ahead and change process. They're going to maintain some of that virtual sales environment. So as we look at that virtual sale, we ultimately have to figure out how to integrate both in person and virtual. And we've got to be ready and embrace that virtual sales environment. As I've been coaching some of my clients, there's a few key areas that keep popping up. First, following a sales process. If you struggled with that activity at the start of our conversation, of putting down the steps of how you go about selling, maybe that's a place that you need to start to identify your gates, your sales process, if you will. Do we follow it every time? The truth is, as I've worked with lots of salespeople, the first 2 to 3 minutes of a sales call is typically the same every time. No, it might be 1 or 2 different little things that happen, but the first few minutes of a call is typically the same. So can we get some best practices as to how to start those out successfully? Can we capture those best practices and create some talk tracks from others on our team? What's working right now? What pain points and surface issues are people struggling with that you can start to replicate for yourself and on your team? So we want to learn how to leverage others and then also leverage video conferencing. If you struggle with the platforms, take some time and get in there and understand the nuances of Teams versus Zoom versus WebEx. Next, pre-call plan. I think pre-call planning is one of those misunderstood things that people just think, hey, I'm going to grab my sheet of paper, grab my notes, look at it 2 minutes beforehand. But the reality is we've got to take a step back and figure out what is it that we want to accomplish on this call. Do we have a strong upfront contract? Are we ready to discuss what it is that they were hoping to discuss? Who's going to all be there and how much time are we going to have? Is it one of those meetings that all of a sudden we're going to get cut short? Did we get the right link in the video chat, in the invite? All of those things need to be addressed. And one of the biggest thing is first 3 questions that you're going to ask? Have we taken time to really plan out what are those first three things that we're hoping to uncover? And have we taken time to figure out what might they ask us? Next, we want to be different. We want to focus on them, not on your products or services. You could say we want to be a pattern interrupt. I mean, you want to be different. You want to sound different. You want to act different than the competition. But if we just go in with the old same features and benefits, we're no different than the other salesperson they've been talking to. So if we take a look and really try to sound different from the competition, we start to look at how we're able to do that. And bonding and rapport is one of those key areas to tactfully and strategically try to build some comfort with our prospect, with our clients as we build those relationships. So it's all about building a comfortable environment to help them to discover and to open up and be able to answer some of those questions. Another area to be different is use something in our world we call an upfront contract. But we set some agreements up front so that we can eliminate that mutual mystification. Why is it that we're here today? What is it that we're trying to accomplish together? Another thing, Mr. Prospect, hey, if this were going to be a good meeting, what would we have covered? And then I can get permission to ask questions and to dive deeper into some of those things. And the last thing in an upfront contract is an outcome. The outcome step is so important because I got permission to let that prospect know, Bill, would it be a problem if I don't think I can help you? Are you okay if I let you know that? I get permission to tell them that I can't help them if we're not the right service or products and services can't fix their issues. I want to be able to bow out of that interaction and not try to sell a square peg into a round hole. So once we try to be a bit of a pattern interrupt using some strategy behind building comfort and taking away that mystification, we then can move into that qualifying step. And there's a couple of different areas that we need to focus on when it really comes to qualifying opportunities. What are the reasons to do business? I mean, most of the time, salespeople can get into the surface issues, the surface pains. A lot of times they dive it down a little bit deeper and get into some of those reasons and impacts. But without questioning and strategically asking different question sets, we're not able to really get to the middle of the onion, so to speak, if we peel back the onion and get to the personal impacts. What we've learned is if there's no personal impact, if there's no emotional pain there, more than likely our prospect isn't going to make a transition and a change. So we've got to be able to figure out a compelling reason for somebody to do something different. We use the Sandler's pain funnel to dive in through reverses and questions to figure out what is that impact there. Next, investment. What are they willing to invest? I mean, not everybody can afford what it is that we offer. I mean, you think about your products, your services. We've got some target pricing that we're trying to attain. But if there's not enough reason to invest in your services, again, we would want to bow out if they're not willing and able to invest. And decision. How is it that they go about making decisions? It's not about making the decision, but it's about uncovering their decision-making process. In working with lots and lots of different salespeople, we've come to make an assumption that no one makes a decision by themselves. There's almost always a hidden decision maker out there that has some sort of input on that particular project. Either it's somebody that's responsible for it, it's somebody that's accountable, it's somebody who just simply gets consulted or informed of the decisions at hand. So if we look at pain, budget, and decision, we try to uncover those things up front. And ultimately, if we put a proposal together, it's spot on. We take a look at the objections and we bring them back into that qualification to try and uncover those things that are going to slow that process down at the close. So after we've qualified that opportunity thoroughly, we'll go ahead and transition into the presentation or fulfillment step, if you will, the close. And in fulfillment, we're only going to talk about things that they shared that were important to them. We're not going to give them our canned PowerPoint presentation and say, hey, here's all the extra shiny objects that go with it. I don't want them to go, wow, I didn't realize this, and this all came with it. I don't want those, so I don't want to pay for that. So when we go ahead and present, I'm only going to be presenting to what they shared with me back when I was discussing some of those pains. Lastly, if they go ahead and place their order, now we're going to talk about post-sell and how our relationship's going to change from a client or from a prospect salesperson to a client vendor type relationship. How is it that we're going to work together going forward and be leverage each other's opportunities to have success together as a partner? So when you take a look at these steps, when you take a look at some of the strategy behind these concepts, there's a lot that's going on to uncover things before we just go ahead and present so that we can have spot on presentations. People are busier and busier, and when we're leveraging the virtual sale, they're having more and more meetings. So we want to make sure that we've planned and present precisely what it is that they're looking for. So we only had 25 minutes together. We had limited time, and there's a lot more strategy and tactics behind some of these concepts. So ultimately, there's a couple of ways that we can continue this conversation. James is going to come on here in a second, and if there's any questions, he'll be able to answer a few of them. Steve, you can go ahead and forward it. And because there's such limited time, you can connect with me after. But we're also giving away a 45-minute complimentary sales tune-up. And I'm also giving some of the questioning tools, client retention tools, and some the top 10 sales behaviors tool to the Event Tech participants, because I think it's important to walk away with some things that you can use in addition to what we chatted about here today. So if you go out to psta.sandler.com/success, you're able to download your copy of those tools and take a look at those questions, because there's lots of different ideas for you to leverage. The questioning tool's got 125 questions to help you through multiple situations. Happy to continue our conversation. Feel free to shoot me an email or reach out to me. And otherwise, James, are there any questions or that you've come up with or in the Q&A that I can try to answer?
Absolutely, there are, Eric, and thank you again for joining us at Event Tech Live. Bit of a delay on my line at the moment, but I'll work through this. Several comments and things that I've noted here. The whole subject of sales and the sales process is really relevant in the current climate. There's been loads of talk about what platforms to run your hybrid or virtual event, what technology to engage your attendees through internet connections and through video links. But ultimately, if you run an exhibition, for example, and companies don't want to sponsor or participate within your virtual exhibition, then you have no event. So you've got to, from ground zero, actually find a way to bring those sponsors and bring those exhibitors into your virtual or hybrid environment. And that, to me, is going to be a completely different process. It's frightening to hear in your session that a lot of salespeople are not planning on changing the processes that they've always adopted. But this seems like a massive shift in a similar way to sort of print advertising and online advertising, when a lot of salespeople who sold print advertising suddenly found themselves with, no clients at all because they all shifted to online overnight, and they didn't really have a method to keep up with that and change. What sort of processes, what are some of the good practices that you've seen with some of your clients in the last 12 months as people have had to shift maybe to a completely different way of adopting the sales process?
I think they've added in different technologies and modes of media to try and reach out to prospects and clients and have different cadences. So, because we're on so many different virtual calls, they typically have questions after a call. So they've been able to do little video recordings, Vidyard or some other platform, and send those out to their prospects. They've been able to do a lot of recap videos and follow-up videos for information that they had to get back to their customers. The other pivot and change, so much about sales used to be and is about features and benefits. And I think that's when, in Sandler terms, we call it pain. But it's what are the impacts around those particular areas to the customer? I mean, if we think about software, we've got all the different platforms, we've got all the different dashboards, but we really have to focus on what it does for the customer. What issues does it solve? What things will they lose by not having it? And what personal impacts come out of not having that fixed?
That you mentioned during the session relating to sales calls is, of course, everyone now has access to video calling. You know, even your most basic laptop now, you'll be able to get on Zoom, you'll be able to get on Microsoft Teams. You know, we have FaceTime and WhatsApp video calling in our pockets all the time now. So the sales process and that traditional picking up the phone and dialing the number has changed and evolved into trying to set up video meetings. But one thing that I see often is people not perhaps paying enough attention to what's going on behind them and the professional impression that they can give in those first few seconds of a video call. And I just wondered very briefly before we wrap up, if you might have any advice for people with that sales process about making sure that they've got some company branding, something that's smart, that they're well presented when they make that video call.
I think it's huge because you can have too much behind you as well, too much branding, too many posters or marketing materials behind you. So it's a matter of having just enough, and then also presenting that. Let's just look at your dress, right? Your clothes. If you're talking with some higher level executives, you want to make sure you've got the suit and tie, whatever they're going to be wearing on. Now, if you're dealing with some other folks, and they're just in t-shirts and whatnot, you're not going to want to come to that Zoom meeting with a suit and tie. So you've got to be aware of what that flavor, the dress flavor of the day is. And you were talking about all the different platforms. When I work with a lot of clients and prospects, I let them choose the platform. Bonding and rapport is about making the prospect feel comfortable. I'll push for my particular platform if I really have to, but it's, hey, James, I'm curious. Do you want to send me a calendar invite? And you can kind of pick that video platform. So then you can choose which it's going to be that we're going to connect with. And as a salesperson, I just have to be comfortable with it. It's one less miscue that I can have with prospect so we can get into that comfort mode to help discover what the real problems are. I'd hate for them to log into a call. In fact, I had a client call me before this talk, and he had said, Eric, he goes, my client was 15 minutes late for our video call because they couldn't get into the platform. And it was one that their bosses picked out. So I want my client and my prospect to be comfortable with that platform that we're using.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've been talking about leveraging the new virtual sale with our friend Eric Thompson, Vice President at Sandler Training by PSTA. Eric, it's been great to have you back again at Event Tech Live USA Canada 21. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks very much for another insightful session, and we hope to see you again at Event Tech Live very soon.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate being here.